coming. Would somebody mind shutting the door? People can sneak in, but we may as well.
Otherwise.
Yeah, we may as well try to be a little professional about this. So my name's Amelia Beamer. You all know that. I'm working on a novel called Mars TV, and I'm just gonna dive in and read. Chapter 1. Pancakes again. Marina Enriquez felt barely human as she tried to get her breakfast down. Pancakes were about the best breakfast you could get on Mars. Most of the food was chalky and mushy from the deep space packaging. But today, even the pancakes turned to ash in her throat. She couldn't help but think of the outbuildings where the food supplies were. The dark plastic tubs stacked 15 feet high, full of number 10 cans and vacuum-sealed buckets. Supplies weren't being guarded. Not yet. But they probably ought to be. Marina sat on the plastic chair at the plastic table amidst the din of the cafeteria. Across from her, her little son Robert banged his foot against the table leg and slurped at his fork. He liked to sit across from her, these days, and she liked the freedom of that, but sometimes she missed having him in her lap. "Mama," he said, "why is the people all scared?" She choked down the bite of pancake. She should have been the one to bring it up, not wait for him to ask. The kid was so smart, it felt like he ran circles around her sometimes. "Mi amor," she said, "Mars has a new problem." She was part Mexican, and she'd never had the chance to learn Spanish, so it was a point of pride to use what little she did know. It helped her feel connected to her roots, although those roots were on a planet she'd never see again. "A problem?" he said, his eyebrows up. "You mean like the dome has a leak again?" "Kind of like that," she said. He looked up at the ceiling in alarm. "No, mi amor," she said, "the dome is fine." He frowned. "For now," he said, with another glance up. There was so much of his father in him, Paul's sense of humor as well as his good looks. Already Robert was 7 in Earth years, almost 4 in Martian, old enough to understand a lot. Little Martian. He looked like he'd grow up to be as dark as Paul, despite the fact that his mother could almost pass for white. Mixed race wasn't really an issue on Mars, which was refreshing. All of the kids were strange enough, with their big heads and spindly limbs from the low gravity. "It's like this," she said. If Robert didn't hear about the supply capsule from her, he'd hear about it from someone else. "You know how we get supply capsules from Earth?" He grinned. "I got Spider-Man stickers from my Nana and Papa G in a capsule. Spider-Man's black and brown like me." She was surprised he remembered that far back. The capsules came only every 26 months, when the 2 planets were closest. But it was important he knew who his family was, even if all he would ever get was video messages sent across the great gulf between the planets, and the occasional lightweight gift that those back on Earth could afford to ship. "That's right," she said. "The thing is, we're supposed to get a capsule from Earth soon, but it's not here yet. We can't see it on the satellites. People are getting worried, because the capsule's got a lot of things we need, like food and microchips for your tablet." "Why's our food late?" he said. She had her suspicions about why. High stakes made for good reality TV, and that was why they were all here, with cameras in every room and subdermal microphones implanted in people's throats to pick up every word they said and pipe it back to servers on Earth to be packaged as reality TV. Only 1,000 people got this opportunity of a lifetime to live on the red planet. And the cameras, the microphones, that wasn't so different from the life she'd had on Earth. Growing up, she'd always had the US government and various companies tracking her every move, her every purchase, her every communication. At least Mars Now was transparent about it. She missed the old days when Mars Now was a scrappy startup. Only a media conglomerate would ever lie about a supply capsule just to raise ratings, but she didn't know that for a fact. She glanced around the cafeteria. Tired people with puffy faces and baggy muscles from the low gravity, hunched over their breakfast, deep into their conversations. "We don't know why," she said. There was no point in explaining corporate politics to a little kid. Ratings were up across the whole network of Mars TV shows. That was the best possible rumor, that Mars Now had merely lied about the delivery window, so that when the capsule showed up, they'd be a hero in the 11th hour. There were other, nastier rumors about how Mars now was in deep financial trouble. Their stocks were down. There were even people who said that maybe they'd never sent the supply capsule at all. But people were going to say stuff. That was why she'd started the Chronicle, Mars's only independent newspaper, to fight the rumors. Any group of people who were scared and vulnerable enough would create their own information. So she stayed up nights with a small team, researching and writing. Aside from the Chronicle, Mars now controlled everything that Earth saw and heard about Mars. Robert looked down at his plate, and then up at her. "We don't have enough food?" Panic made him talk fast. "I can share, Mama," he said. He pushed his plate with the mangled remains of his pancake to the middle of the table. "I can share my food." She grabbed his little hands. His fingers were sticky with syrup and crumbs, and right now she didn't give a crap about that. "I love you so much," she said. She'd never intended to be a mother until she took the one-way ticket to this alien world and realized she'd die out here. Instinct had kicked in. Sometimes she felt having a kid had been a mistake. Humans weren't meant to be on this planet. She could feel that in her bones. "I love you because you're kind," she said, "and for so many other reasons." He gave her a smile. "Eat your breakfast for me, please," she said. "That's yours. Mine's right here." She looked down at her half-eaten plate. It took everything she had to keep her emotions in check. She wouldn't cry, not in front of him, not over this. Today she had her own breakfast. Her credit account was low, and she'd have to pick up some extra shifts soon if she was going to make it through the end of this month. Breakfast for the two of them had cost over half a day's labor. Prices for everything had skyrocketed. Food, water, everything. And it was only going to get worse. Almost 10 years they'd been out here, and there had never been any problems with the supply capsules. Until now. "What about the crickets?" he asked. He looked dubiously at his breakfast. "We can eat more crickets and microgreens," he said. His face was bright with hope. "And potatoes." "Yes, we can," she said. Every centimeter of usable space inside the dome was already being used to grow microgreens and crickets and potatoes, the most efficient foods to grow on Mars. But he was right. People were talking about how quickly they could convert some of the outbuildings to hold atmosphere. Maybe the colonists would commandeer some of the science labs. It wasn't like studying rocks was vital to survival. The double door to the cafeteria banged open, and a rush of third shifters in dirty coveralls streamed in. Robert shrank into his seat, looking at the big adults. It was a good thing for Earth that reality TV didn't include the smells. No matter how popular Mars TV was, Earthies could never really understand what it felt like to live here. Planet Mars stank. The cafeteria was thick with the smell of human sweat and the red, salty dust that got into everything. Behind the cafeteria counter, the food baked under the hot lights. Marina's mouth tasted of instant coffee. The payload for real coffee was too high. There was only instant coffee on Mars. Underneath all of those smells was the ammonia nose tingle of bleach. The third shifters got in line for their food. They were laughing and insulting each other like normal, but there was an urgency in the way they lined up, fast, as if the boiled beef and stringy potatoes on the dinner menu might somehow disappear before they could dig in. There was even a line for the 3D printer. She looked back at Robert and told him the truth. "We've never had a problem like this. It might go away soon, it really might, but we're gonna deal with it. We're Martians. I need you to be brave. If anyone tells you scary things, you come talk to me, okay?" He nodded. "Scary things like we're gonna die?" he said. He was more curious than frightened. "Worst case scenario, the colonists would use up the last of the Earth's supplies and all the locally grown food long before another capsule could arrive. It would be another 26 months before the planets were close enough to risk sending another capsule. Even if the capsule showed up next week, the damage had been done. There were already people talking about Mars now, how they couldn't trust the corporation anymore. But Marina had to give it the benefit of the doubt. Sending a capsule between two planets was compared to throwing a basketball from Los Angeles into a hoop in New York without hitting the backboard. Nothing in space worked the way you thought it would. Surely the capsule would arrive. It had to. They wouldn't survive without it. "Why can't we just get a new capsule?" he said. She shook her head. "It's complicated. It'll take time. Earth is really far away." He pursed his lips. "But why, Mama? Why what? Why is Earth so far? That she could answer. See, if my plate is the sun, and my fork is Earth, and my cup is Mars, she demonstrated the planet's relative orbits, with Mars on the outside, never catching up. He leaned over the table and pointed. That's us? In space? She was glad his focus was off the capsule. Right, so every Martian year, that's about every 2 Earth years, the planets get close together like this. She showed the smaller orbit of Earth coming even with the big loop of Mars. And that's when we can send things back and forth, like the supply capsules. Preow, he said. That's a rocket noise, Mama. Very good, she said. Robert was a real boy. He loved rocks and dirt and bugs. He even had a thing for dinosaurs, and even though he'd never been outside the dome his whole life. So you see, she said, as the plate that was Earth sped along in its orbit, once Earth goes away, we won't see it close by for more than 20 months. That's, she did the math in her head, about 600 sleeps. She set down the 2 planets on the table and traced the path of the supply capsule between them. It takes time to build the capsules, too, she said, and time to send them through space. Robert's eyes were huge. Why didn't they send the supply capsule? They did send it, she said, trying to curb the meltdown. She had to believe Mars now wasn't capable of that level of lie. To pretend to send a supply capsule? That was too low. We saw the video of the capsule, she said, the construction and the launch, but it was a long time ago. Too long for you to remember it. He wasn't having this. His jaw was set and his beautiful eyes were narrowed. She tried again. Space is big. And grown-ups make mistakes sometimes. I know, he said. Marina looked at the clock. Those red digital numbers showed up in her dreams. It was 7:30 a.m. A straggle of third shifters were eyeing their table. She had to get her kid cleaned up into the day room so she could get to work. Finish your breakfast for me, please, Wobber, she said. Wobber was what he'd said when he'd first learned how to say his name, and it had stuck. She picked at a bit of hardened mystery crud that was stuck to the lip of her thin plastic plate. Nothing was ever clean on this planet. He ate the last few bites from his plate, then licked the syrup from it. Crumbs spilled onto his lap and onto the table. Gotta eat it all, Mama, he said. Gotta eat it all down. He broke her heart and he put it right back together. Good idea, she said, and forced herself to clean her plate. That done, she stood up and gathered her dishes. Let's go, she said. Chapter 2. Gonna go just a little bit more. Later that same day, Marina sat at a conference table with her team. The multi-purpose room was empty, save for the 3 of them, and the bald, paper-white walls and the plain cement floor lent an emptiness to the conversation. She was pretty sure, from the industrial drain in the middle of the floor, that this room doubled as an abattoir for the locally farmed rabbits that were occasionally on the menu. Not that she could afford to eat rabbit. It was close to midnight, and she felt jittery from the overhead fluorescence. The exhaustion of working on her feet all day had taken on a force-like gravity. None of her contacts inside Mars Now had returned the messages she'd sent as she'd worked on the paper during her every break from her shift work, on the treadmill afterward, and then over dinner. She needed to get to the bottom of the supply capsule problem, and she couldn't afford to panic. Okay, she said. Worst case scenario, Dan. Dan Johnson was her right-hand staffer. He was bold, he spoke his mind, and she always felt more secure when he was around. Plus, he was handsome, an African-American man in his prime, although she tried not to notice that. Okay, Dan said, so we've got 1,012 colonists. That includes the children. I wanted to be thorough, so I checked with 3 different eggheads. His lips twitched into a blip of a smirk. Dan, she said, interrupting him, I know you're pissed off. Let's not alienate our allies. The scientists are doing us a favor. Let's not call them eggheads, not even privately. Not that there was such a thing as privately on Mars. His face darkened with embarrassment. She went on, trying to smooth things over. The 3 of us know perfectly well that we need the perceived authority of the scientists for the folks back home to take us seriously. She didn't like calling Earth back home, since it wasn't home, but sometimes the phrase slipped out. This was a tender spot for her. She needed the Chronicle to be taken seriously, seen as impartial and honest, not the speculations of a couple of working-class hacks. Go on. Sorry, he said. Anyway, Paulson said we've got 13 months of supplies, Kendall said it was 8 months, and Coker said we have 19 months. I've got their figures all here. He gestured to his tablet. Marina wanted to pull her hair out. If the Martian creme de la creme couldn't make sense of their supplies, how would anyone on Earth understand the scope of the problem enough to help solve it? Let's back up. We've got a couple of big problems, she said. We can't find the supply capsule on the satellites. Why? Are the satellites in error, or was there a mistake with the landing window? Are we checking to make sure it hasn't landed somewhere else on the planet? That's important, but the thing people are really panicking about is how long the food's gonna last. He handed over the tablet with the figures. I don't know why they can't agree, he says. I think it says a lot about how out of touch the upper classes are with the reality of life on Mars. Projections. He made a noise in his throat. If someone with some sense was running this place, we wouldn't be in this problem. But no, we're at the whim of shareholders and stock prices. And has anyone noticed that Mars now is about to file a quarterly return? Marina looked at her other staffer, Chris, and said, what do you make of it? She liked Chris because she was straightforward, no nonsense, but Chris came on strong. If I may, Chris said, I did the math myself. I'm not sure what models your sources use, she nodded at Dan, but my numbers are a bit stark, just to prepare you. There was a beat of silence. If we stay steady at 2,500 calories per adult, Chris said, about 590 of us will make it until the next capsule gets here, give or take. That's worst case scenario. Current capsule is lost, and we can't get a replacement before the next window. The news sank in. 590, Marina said. How's that going to work? Chris's mouth flattened into a thin line. I may be the newest member of the Chronicle, I may be young, but I understand how the economy works out here. Whoever can pay gets to eat, and the costs will keep going up, and only so many of us Martians will be able to afford it. That's why the scientists are out of touch. Her eyes glinted with anger. We need to figure this out as a society, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm happy to answer questions, if there are any.
Is the book done? Well, I'm hanging on every word. I want to know what happens.
It's very close. It's very close to being done. Yes.
Great. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I don't know when it'll be out, but I will put the information on my website once I know. Thank you all very much. Jim?
Did you see The Martian? And tell us about, because Mars is hot all of a sudden, and you're striking while the iron is hot.
Yeah, I did see The Martian, but I've been working on this novel for 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't mean anything, right? Because Mars is hot right now.
Yeah.
So I'm playing with that. Yeah, for sure. Because I think there are things about that speak to our national consciousness, about being alone, about having resources, about being connected. There are things in that. And one of the things I'm really trying to do here is talk about the real problems that are faced, economic problems, racial problems, inequality, but doing it in the scope that's removed a little bit in the classic way of science fiction. Yeah.
Sort of allegorical. Sort of allegorical in an indirect way. Do you have a publisher lined up for it?
I don't yet, but I do have an agent.
Oh, good. Well, there you go.
So I'm confident.
Yeah, I want to read it too.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.